Hello, I'm Lugatorix and welcome to my Huns faction guide for Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion. Today we're going to be talking about some of the units that the Huns have and also some campaign strategies. So, the Huns are a very interesting faction. In fact, they are almost unique. There are only two factions in the game that are quite like the Huns and the Vandals. And what makes the Huns interesting is that they start off with absolutely zero starting settlements. They start off as a horde, which is very rare for Rome Total War. Like I said, only one other faction is like that. So, to complete the campaign as the hordes, you have to hold 15 settlements, including northern Italy and Thracia, so the two regions with swords in. We start off with quite a few armies, but no territories, up in this region, a little bit to the sort of north of the Roxolani, and to the east of the Vandals and the Sarmatians and all that as well. So that's kind of our starting position. We're going to have to be moving south though towards these territories. The Huns army is described as almost unmatched horsemen and archers, limited supporting infantry. So it's a very, very cavalry based faction. Some really, really cool stuff though. And yeah, very missile-y type faction, which I think is really, really cool. So the difficulty factor is estimated easy, and I think the reason for that is that you have a very, very overpowered army. You have a lot of force, particularly in comparison to the Roxolani and the Sarmatians and all that early on. And there's you can just sort of trample across everyone if you want to. But there certainly are challenges related to being a horde faction, and we're going to be discussing them a little bit later on. So first of all, I want to talk about the units that the Huns have, so I'll see you in a second. Alright, so these are the Hun units, and as you can see, not a huge amount of infantry. This is our pretty much one and only weakness, if I'm being honest. So let's just go through it, and we'll see how it goes. We're going to start off with the runaway slave spearmen. Yes, there are no peasants in the terms of the Huns. I normally start off by saying the peasants and they're terrible and don't use them. Well, runaway slave spearmen is the lowest of the low in terms of the Huns, but they're not actually too bad, to be honest. In fact, it even says the lowest of the low. That's quite funny. They use the same terminology as me. But yeah, no armor or anything like that, but still have a defense of 12. An attack of 6 is okay, but a little bit underwhelming. But it's cool they're fast moving. What is decent about runaway slave spearmen, as opposed to a lot of other units, is that there is 120 men in each unit, or in this unit scale. But in any unit scale, they will have more men than most infantry units do, which is cool. Of course, the more men in the unit, then the longer it's going to take for them to go down, and a greater amount of them can go down, and it won't be as consequential because they've got plenty more reserves in that unit. So not a terrible unit by any means. And if this is the lowest of the low for the Huns, comparing it to the lowest of the low of the neighbouring factions, the Goths, the Sarmatians, Roxolani, whatever, this is still a hell of a lot better, so not too bad indeed. We then go on to the Steppe Spearmen. Now again, a little bit underwhelming in terms of attack. This is sort of a more defensive unit, and they can form a Schiltron, which kind of goes into the whole defensive kind of theme. A Schiltron, if you've played Medieval 2 Total War, you'll know about. It's kind of like a spear wall formation. Not quite as overpowered as a phalanx, but not too bad either. 13 defense is pretty solid, but nothing amazing. But again, 120 men in the unit, so again, not a terrible unit by any stretch of the imagination. And they have a bonus fighting cavalry, which is quite cool. And there's quite a few cavalry-based factions starting off near us, so actually that's quite a useful thing indeed. Then we go on to the Steppe Swordsmen, a little bit more of an offensive unit comparatively to the others. They have an attack of 9, which again isn't hugely amazing, but isn't terrible either. A defense of 15 and a charge bonus of 5. They can pack a bit more of a punch by just sort of charging forward and being a little bit crazy. And well, charging forward is something they may do because, as it says there, charging forward without orders. The Hunnic army is not exactly the most organised army ever necessarily. It can be a little bit unruly at times, and this is kind of an example. I personally don't like units that can charge forward without orders because, to be honest, the units in Rome Total War have a mind of their own anyway, let alone if it's actually coded in that they're going to just charge forward without you asking. But saying that, not too bad indeed. There's certainly plenty of worse units in the game, that's for sure. And then finally, in terms of infantry, the Step Heavy Spearmen. This is a pretty damn solid unit indeed. A very defensive unit, defense of 21 as you can see. Bonus fighting cavalry, good morale, well armoured. This is a kind of unit if you want someone just to sort of stand their ground and have a sort of impenetrable wall of spears. Well, the Step Heavy Spearmen will do a very good job of that indeed. And of course, their good armour means that they are not particularly vulnerable to missiles. And a lot of sort of early game troops just simply won't be able to penetrate the actual thick, heavy armour that they're wearing. This is more the kind of unit which you're not going to be using too much maybe in the early game, because in the early game, of course, you're not going to be fighting too much in cities or like defending cities or anything like that. You know, you're going to be on the open field, so you want to be using cavalry because cavalry is designed more for the open field than infantry is. But once you have maybe settled down, which we'll be talking about later, then this will be quite a good unit just for holding a city and, you know, getting in those tight city streets and just blockading it and making sure that nobody passes. So pretty damn solid unit, nothing too bad indeed. Now we're going to get onto the cavalry, and we're going to start off with the herdsmen. Not the most amazing unit, but this is a unit of, well, they're kind of like cavalry. They're fast moving, so, you know, that's kind of what you'd expect. 4 attack, 7 defense isn't, you know, particularly amazing, honestly, but the fast moving aspect of them means they're quite good at sort of getting around the flank quickly. If you quickly need a unit of cavalry to get around the side or the back, they'll do that job very effectively. And also, of course, at the end of battles, if you have an army that's running away like cowards, screaming away from the Hunnic army, well, the herdsman will, you know, get them down and make sure that you never see them again, because they'll be dead in the ground. So, you know, obviously this isn't a unit that you're going to be wanting in a big long slugging match or anything like that, but not too bad indeed at chasing troops down. That's what they're good for. And what's cool about them, again, similar to what I was saying earlier, quite a few men actually in each unit, so that's a pretty good thing. In fact, all of the Hun units, you know, 66 cavalry in a unit is pretty damn solid indeed. And we're going to move on to the tribal cavalry, recruited from among the client tribes of the Huns. 7 attack, 12 defense, 7 charge bonus. The 7 attack is a little bit underwhelming, but coupled with the charge bonus means they can actually pack quite a bit of a punch, and it's sort of that first hit where they'll do most of the damage. You don't particularly want them to be in a good, you know, big long slugging match, because their defense isn't amazing and they won't hold up for a huge amount of time, but they are quite good at that sort of, initial kind of hit. And what those initial hits can do is seriously reduce the morale of the opposition. If you've got a sort of tight battle going on and you need a hit to come in, then this is the kind of unit that can do a pretty solid job indeed. And they're fast moving as well, so they can get in that position and get that big fast charge in pretty effectively. And they can swim as well. Any unit that can swim is a pretty funny unit indeed. So tribal cavalry, not too bad. Nothing hugely amazing though. We've certainly got better cavalry units to come. And talking of better cavalry units, Hun Lancers. Now, in terms of attack, not particularly amazing again, but the charge bonus is even better than the previous units. So, with cavalry, the actual singular attack stat isn't too important, because you're not really going to be using cavalry for, again, like I said, a long sort of slugging match. That's what you use infantry for. The infantry can stay there all day and fight like spearmen, you know, are kind of, you know, used to doing. What cavalry is good for is that initial charge and turning the tide of a battle by, you know, causing a sort of domino effect of breaks when they create that charge and break one unit. And the Hun Lancers can certainly do that. But what is good about them is 18 defense, which is pretty damn high indeed. And that means if they do have to, you know, kind of go in that big old long slugging match, well, they can still do a decent job, coupled with the fact that they're well armoured, means that, you know, their armour isn't going to be easily penetrated and they're not going to go down too quickly. So if they do have to fight for a long time, they may not be doing too much damage after the initial charge, but their defense is pretty good. So what I'd probably do with these guys is charge them in, move them out nice and quickly with that fast moving trait, and then move them back in and get another charge in, and that way they can do a lot more damage, that is for sure. Next up, Hun Horde Chosen Warriors. A bit of a mouthful, but a pretty decent unit, so, you know, it's worth it, I suppose. This is a Horde unit. We'll be talking more about Horde units later, but anyway, they are among the best fighting individuals in their tribe. A 10 attack, 22 defense, which is very, very high, and a charge bonus of 6. This is a very, very hardy unit, that's for sure. Good morale, well armoured, good stamina. They're going to stay up for a long time, and even if they've been moving around and they, you know, most other units would be tired, it's hard to tire these geezers out. And of course, with most units, or, you know, any unit in Rome Total War, If a unit gets too tired, then their morale will go down quicker because, obviously it's harder to fight and whatever. Well, these guys, they can just run around all day like cavalry do, and they'll be perfectly fine and their morale won't be going down too much. A very, very hardy unit again, and fast moving, and it's quite rare to see sort of heavy units of cavalry with that fast moving trait. But the Huns seem to have that, and that's very, very cool and quite overpowered as well indeed. So yeah, very, very good unit of cavalry. Certainly do rate them. The chosen elite is really what these are, and you can see that in terms of the stats and how they perform on the campaign. Next up, Hunnic Heavy Cavalry, 10 attack, 22 defense. Pretty similar unit in all honesty. This is a sort of very, very hardy unit, but I'm not going to talk too much about them because honestly it's pretty much the same. What I will say again though, I love the fact there's 66 men or horses or whatever you want to call them in each unit. That's so overpowered, that's really a huge amount of cavalry. You can just swarm units, and because they're fast moving, what you can do with the Huns is just get several units of cavalry flanking maybe a particular unit if it's become isolated, and you can just crush them from all sides and they'll just go down instantly. So very, very solid unit. That's what they're good at. They just hardy and they'll do a good job. So quite overpowered, particularly if you use them en masse like the Huns tend to do. Then the Warlord. Obviously the Warlord is going to be good because these are the men that are going to be protecting the main geezer. And if your Warlord goes down, that's going to seriously impact the morale of your troops, and the battle is going to be a lot harder to win. And of course you don't want to be losing generals. They're the only ones that can hire mercenaries and stuff. And of course you don't have options to recruit early on unless you want to settle down really, really early, which I wouldn't recommend. So excellent morale, well armoured, very good stamina, 23 defense. They're going to stand up for a long time, which is exactly what you want. And finally, we're going to get onto horse archers. Now, horse archers are very overpowered. That's why I love Scythia in the main campaign. Scythia is my favourite faction. Of course, horse archers are great because you can just run around hitting troops all day with your missiles, and they can only dream of hitting you back. You're just too damn fast. Of course, if they get into hand-to-hand combat, they aren't quite as good, but Hun horsemen, 8 missile attack is pretty solid indeed. A lot of basic horse archers have a missile attack of around 5 or 6. So 8 missile attack isn't too bad. 6 and 9 defense and attack isn't that amazing. Like I said, you don't particularly want them to be in the melee. You want to be trying to get them to sort of skirt around men. So if you do have them on skirmish mode, make sure you keep an eye on them just in case they get trapped in the corner and they're in a bit of a sticky situation. But still, very solid unit, that's for sure. Next up, the Hunnic Archers. Pretty similar, but a better defense, so not quite as a liability on the sort of melee front. Again, if you just want to sort of sit back and let the computer do all the work with all the skirmishing, then this is a pretty good unit just to do that. Very good stamina. They can just run all day and they'll be killing units. Not a huge amount to say about them other than they're pretty damn solid indeed. So, horse archers are overpowered. Of course they are. And then finally, Hunnic Elite Warriors. This is a new level of overpoweredness in terms of the Huns. And this is, kind of why the game says at the beginning that the Huns have a fairly easy time of it in terms of the difficulty factor, because they have units like this, and it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. A 9 missile attack is very high for horse archers. 10 attack, 15 defense isn't actually too bad for a normal unit of cavalry, let alone a unit of cavalry which is specialised in actually firing on people. Now, again, you don't particularly want them to be running around hitting people in the melee, but if they do, then it's not a big deal, because actually they can stand up and do their own thing. And what's really cool about this unit is that with a lot of horse archers, and again in my Scythia campaign, and with experiences with other horse archers and other campaigns that I've done, once the horse archers run out of arrows, they're pretty useless really. They're basically just a bit rubbish like cavalry, because they can't really do a whole lot in the melee, and you don't want to rely on them in the melee because they'll just melt straight away. Well, these guys can still pack a punch with their initial charge of 6, which, like I discussed earlier with the heavy cavalry, is pretty solid. So actually, they've got a pretty good attack on them. And that means if you're really running out of units, if you're having a bit of a bad day, or you just need that charge from anyone, it doesn't matter who it is, well, this unit can do a pretty damn good job indeed. Very, very solid unit, that's for sure. And yeah, some of the best horse archers you'll ever see. So pretty solid, but pretty expensive as well. Anyway, these are the Hunnic units. It is an overpowered army. It is a very, very fun army to use. I do like them. And even though the infantry, there isn't a huge amount of infantry and you haven't got foot archers or whatever, doesn't really matter because the cavalry makes up for it, and actually the infantry that is there isn't too bad. It's just not particularly diverse or orderly either. But anyway, we're going to be getting onto the campaign map now, and I'm going to be talking about some strategy over there. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Alright, here we are. Now, of course, the fog of war is off, like I say all the time with these faction guides. The fog of war is only off because, you know, I want to show it for demonstration purposes, to show you what's around, but I don't normally play with the fog of war off. And this is the Hun starting position, or, you know, the army is the Hun starting position. We have two notifications, people in flight, the Vandals, who are our horde, you know, similar kind of faction over here, but we won't be talking about them quite yet, and a powerful faith, which is paganism. Now, what to do as the Huns? Well, like I said, we've got quite a few armies, and they're big armies, and they've got generals, and they're pretty solid indeed. I mean, look at all these armies. It's really something, and you can cause a cataclysmic amount of damage with them, that's for sure. But what do you want to do? Well, how do hordes work? Well, you go around, and you obviously conquer places or go through places, and you kind of have two options when you conquer somewhere. Let's just say we attacked Campus Armatae and we took it off the rebels. You would have two options. You could occupy the settlement, or you could sack the settlement. If you occupy the settlement, then the settlement then belongs to you, and you have a settlement now. But it also means that you start losing your horde units. I believe you lose a third of your horde units on the first turn, and then like half the second turn, and something like that. So your army will go down, and you'll have to sort of settle over here if you decide to do that. But if you decided to sack the settlement, then you would like reduce some of the population and all that, and you'd get a bit of money. Not a lot of money from this place, but from other places you'd get a lot more. Let's say if you sacked Constantinople, you'd get a ton of money. But you wouldn't actually keep the settlement. You would then move on, but with a lot more money to boot. So what do you want to do? Well, what are the advantages of settling down and not settling down? Well, you don't really want to settle down too early, because at the moment you've got a huge advantage with all your big horde armies, which you're not going to have if you settle down. You also don't have to worry about people, you know, attacking you or being under siege or anything like that, which is quite cool. And you know, life's kind of good, but you don't want to stay like this forever either, because first of all, you need to take territory. This is Rome Total War. We're not just meant to be standing around in the field collecting money. You know, this is about fighting and taking settlements. But also, the economy can be a little bit of an issue, because of course, if you have no settlements, that's no farming income, no trade, no sea trade, anything like that, no tax revenue. And that means that you haven't got a huge amount of income, but you still need to sort of, you know, support armies and potentially hire mercenaries and whatever. If you have a look at the finances, it's a lot of zeros, because, you know, we're basically going to be at 10,000 for a while, and we're not going to gain money. And, you know, money is an important aspect of Rome Total War. So you kind of need to decide where you want to settle down, and then wherever you want to settle down, you then have to get there, first of all, but sack everything on the way. Now, where would you want to settle down? Well, you don't want to settle down over here, really. You can, but if you did, let's say, settle down in Campus Armatae, then that's pretty pointless of you playing the Huns. The whole point of being the Huns is that you have a hoardable, or, you know, you're a hoarding faction, and that's the fun of playing as the Huns. You might as well have just chosen the Sarmatians or something if you'd done that. So settling up here is kind of pointless, because you might as well take advantage of the fact that you have a ton of men early on. Now, also, once you settle down, really, because public order is going to be a bit of an issue and all that kind of thing, you kind of need to centralise in that kind of region and create a sort of base of operations to move forward on. And what that means is, wherever you settle, it's going to be your home for quite a while. So if you settled up here, this is going to be your home for quite a while, and this isn't the best area of the map. Like I've said many times, the villages around this region are pretty garbage. Campus Armatae, Vicus Vandali, Campus Barbaricum. They're not profitable. The most profitable places on the map are by the sea, because you've got a lot of sea trade. And also, these settlements are a lot bigger and have a lot better tech, for example. So you can recruit better troops and also get a lot more money from tax revenue and all that kind of thing. But up here, very little economic potential, which isn't exactly great. So, you know, personally, wouldn't bother settling here. Really, I think there are two candidates for where you'd kind of want to settle. And I would say it's kind of based on the campaign objectives. You want to take Thracia at some point, because that's one of the campaign objectives, and northern Italy is another one. So logically, where to start off with would either be focusing on one of the sort of Italian, modern day Italian settlements, Roman settlements over here, or one of the Eastern Roman settlements over in Greece, and try and create a base of operations from either Greece or modern day Italy, is what I'd kind of do. And then you start off in a very sort of profitable region. I would probably go for maybe, and you know what, I think I'd probably go for Italy actually rather than Greece, but it's kind of up to you. I would probably go for Italy because you can sack more settlements along the way, and also the Western Roman Empire are weaker than the Eastern Roman Empire, so once you do settle down, expanding from that base of operations should be a lot simpler than over here in the east. But what you want to do on the way, of course, is sack settlements so you've got a lot of money. The more money you have once you get over here, then the better position you're going to be in. If you get to, let's say, Rome, you then decide to finally occupy it, and you've got no money, you've then got one of the biggest settlements in the game, a lot of public order issues, which you are going to have because of, you know, the different culture penalties and all of that kind of thing, and you're not going to have a lot of money to sort of reverse that. So trying to sack settlements along the way is quite an important thing. Now, for example, let's say you were going to Italy, an idea could be just to stop off by Constantinople on the way. Where is it? Over here. Stop off by Constantinople on the way, get a ton of money by sacking it, and then moving on. You know, you don't feel compelled to just completely go bird's eye from there to there and sack everything on the way. You can detour a little bit and make sure you get as much money as you can. You might as well take advantage of it. Where wouldn't I attack? Well, you've got to be a little bit careful. For example, you don't want to occupy Colonia Dacia or Vicar Sarmatii or anything like that. You know, leave these factions alone. And the reason you want to kind of leave these factions to it and not take their settlements is because these are hordable factions, and the less hordes in the game the better, because the hordes are quite powerful, as we've seen already. And you know, the Vandals are already here. The Vandals could theoretically attack you, you know, so you kind of want to avoid them as well. But factions such as the Sarmatians, Burgundii, Roxolani, Lombardy, and the Goths. No, I don't know if the Goths can. I discussed it in the faction guide whether they can or not. They can hoard if you take all their settlements. And what happens is, the Sarmatians aren't too much of a threat at the moment. They're pretty pathetic, in fact. But if you took Vicar Sarmatii, then they're going to spawn a lot of yellow armies, and it's going to kind of look like this, but a yellow version around Vicar Sarmatii, and that's not what you want at all. That's just going to be a sort of another hurdle for you to get over. So I wouldn't do that. I would leave these factions alone and instead really gun for the non-hordable factions, the Roman empires in particular. That's what you want to do. Now, how do you reduce public order as the Huns or any hordable faction? Well, quite a good way of doing it is, let's say for example we were going to go for Constantinople. We were going to settle in Constantinople. What you could do is attack Constantinople, sack it, so you're going to reduce the population and get a ton of money, and then obviously your armies will then leave the city, and then attack it again, but this time occupy it. So essentially you have to take it twice. But on the second time you take it, the public order should be better, and also you just get a lot more money, which is good, which means that you can build buildings and whatever that pertain to increasing public order. So that's what I'd recommend. Wherever you do decide to settle, sack it first, then actually properly take it and occupy it. That's what I would do personally. But yeah, in essence, you want to go down south because that's where the rich territories are. I wouldn't go south down this way just because the Sassanids are probably one of the more difficult factions to face in the game. And also, what's quite good about the Sassanids is it always causes the Eastern Roman Empire to split a bit because they have to have half their force over here dealing with the pesky Sassanids that are sort of, you know, around here. And then that means that this area is kind of vulnerable. So you kind of want the Sassanids to be around so that they can annoy the Eastern Roman Empire and divert their attention over to the sort of Middle Eastern region. So wouldn't go down that direction. I would go down this direction, sacking everything along the way, getting as much money as possible, and eventually settling down in a profitable region, which also sets you up well to complete the campaign objectives as the Huns. But that's pretty much all I have to say for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.